Chamberlain, thank you so much
Thank you, Esther.
for joining us
Pleasure to
today.
be here.
It's been an interesting year for the country. I mean, from the standpoint of the economy, and we've been waiting for the presentation of the 2019 budget. It's a leaner budget, down from 9.1 trillion. We're now at 8.8 trillion. Now, for you, what would you say were the key highlights? Let me just quickly put out some of the key highlights. Recurrent expenditure, just over 4 trillion now. We have capital expenditure at just over 2 trillion now. We have debt service at 2.14 trillion naira. We have, of course, oil price assumption, $60 per barrel, and an oil production assumption of 2.3 million barrels per day. Are these realistic projections for us?
I think they are fairly realistic. You've seen a decline in the budget number from last year. I think the reason is because of how we have performed in previous years. You know, it's one thing to budget, another thing to be able to generate those funds. To September, my understanding is that the budget performance is somewhere around 30–40%. So you have to be realistic going into an election year.
Okay. Well, for you, what would you say? I mean, what were your expectations? Yes, realistic, but what were your expectations perhaps on some specific items? Were you expecting better from, I mean, the recurrent versus the capital expenditure? We're doing 30–70, and it looked like, I mean, there was more room for hopefully an upside, but it looks like no, that hasn't happened.
Well, again, going into an election year, we've seen quite a bit of criticism of the government in terms of its handling of social issues. We've been spending quite a bit in infrastructure. However, there are social and human development issues also that you have to address. We have the debt portfolio, which is also rising. So I think in that regard, the government had to reconsider whether it should rebalance towards more recurrent and more debt service, and then provide more funds for defense, education, healthcare, and things like that.
Now, during his presentation today, that's the president at the parliament, you know, there were boos and, of course, from the opposition. And, you know, he tried to explain that, look, we're coming out of a recession, and these were the numbers when we came in, talking about the external reserves somewhere around just over 20 billion. Now we're double that. He talked about the exchange rate stability, talked about the Niger Delta, oil production. But obviously that still was met with boos, and, you know, some of the lawmakers, obviously from the opposition, were shouting, no, that is not true. That on one hand, and if you look at the plan, the blueprint that this government used, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which is meant to, you know, accelerate growth. We did see some momentum, but all of a sudden this year, we lost some of that momentum. And that's what we've all been talking about. Why did we lose that momentum?
Well, we did because we didn't quite see that growth spurt that we're expecting. I mean, at some point during the first quarter, we began to see an exit of portfolio investors. We haven't seen an influx of foreign direct investments as we would expect. Yes, we'll see, you know, things like trying to diversify the economy more to mining and agriculture. But on the whole, the oil and gas sector still holds sway on the economy, and that is not good enough. Now, would that reverse trend, hopefully, by second quarter of next year? Yes. If the election goes well, we'll get a new government in time, you appoint the ministers, you assign portfolios. If you do things differently, you know, going forward, I think we could see some growth momentum going into second quarter of next year.
No, revenue generation, I mean, was a sticking point for the government this year. We did see higher oil prices, as high as $86 per barrel. Now, many describe that as a good window for the government. Would you say that we took advantage of that? I mean, to, of course, build the reserves and use that extra cash to, you know, focus on some infrastructure?
My worry is our, you know, reliance on oil prices all the time.
But we're still an oil, I mean, the economy is still an oil-led economic growth.
Well, have we done enough to truly, you know, fast-track, you know, the process of diversification? I don't believe so. So that's where more emphasis should be, not on what oil price would be, rather than how much are we going to get from foreign direct investments, as you know, alluded very correctly. How much of the internal momentum are we going to see going forward? You know, there has to be some release of funds from CBN, from the banks. Banks are not lending to SMEs, and SMEs are strong drivers of growth. So you're not going to have an internal combustion that you would expect unless the SMEs are bubbling, unless you have bank lending growing, unless you have foreign direct investments. So that's where we should focus more. And then as time goes on, whether oil prices at 50 or 80, you know, you would see a reversal of trend.
And looking at this budget, I mean, on the face of it, is this a budget, what can this budget deliver something tangible for us? I know, yes, I know it's an election year, but at some point, hopefully, Q2, Q3, the dust will settle.
Yes.
And we will begin to, obviously, we're going to have to talk about implementation. But what can this budget give us?
Well, some good news about the budget is it's beginning to look more deeply into the debt service ratios. 80% of our debts are domestic debts. It's making provision for, a larger portion of that to be serviced. And it also allocated quite a bit of resources in education, healthcare, defense, and Niger Delta. Remember, those are the levers of the economy. Bill Gates was here in March and he says, look, you can build all the infrastructure you want, but if you don't address human capital development, then you're not going anywhere. And I think this budget, it's an attempt to try to, go that direction. However, I must point out real quick that the last budget was presented 3 weeks much earlier than this, but it was only signed in June. So let's hope that we have time for this to be passed before the current administration runs out, or maybe into the next administration.
Well, that is a good point, but we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. Sure. Let's move on to another major news out today. Unemployment figures for the third quarter of this year. We've been waiting, for so long for this to come out, and some numbers were put out there. But what we have right now is 23.1%. That's up from 18.8% in the same period of 2017. Yeah. Were you expecting it to be this high, or what were your expectations?
I wasn't expecting it to be any less than what it is right now. We're in a tough economy. We've come out of a recession, growing marginally 1.8% in the last quarter, Q3. However, just take the mere fact that people would grow from age 14 to 15. You have to ask yourself how many of those, working population would step up from, where they are today in 1 year or in 2 years. So without doing anything, unemployment is bound to keep growing. However, the point is you have to grow your economy much faster than the growth of population and the growth of the working population. I believe that this might be organic growth in unemployment, what I'll call organic growth, which means even if you didn't create any jobs, unemployment will still be higher year on year because there are a larger number of, your demographics who are moving into the working population.
Now, the issue of jobs creation, that is definitely a sticking point, especially now that we're in a political year. We've heard the opposition using it, it's become a big issue, using it to criticize this current administration, which has said repeatedly that it has created millions of jobs. We've heard all kinds of numbers, 3 million jobs, 4 million, sometimes even 12 million jobs. And so the question has been asked, what kind of jobs have we created? What the quality of the jobs that we've created? Have we created construction site jobs where, excuse me, people work for 3-6 months and they're off the job? Yeah. Is that a job? So how are we classifying the jobs we've created? I
think that some of the jobs that have been created are in the informal sector. Artisans, construction personnel. Take any program right now, Empower program or any of those social or SME development programs. As soon as it puts some money in people's hands, it creates additional jobs. The school feeding program, for instance, you're going to have a whole bunch of caterers, employing cooks, employing people serving. That's jobs that you're creating now. How sustainable those jobs are, what is the quality of those jobs is a different story. But create jobs first before you think about the quality of jobs. High-tech jobs, I wouldn't say it's growing. There's a burden, a fast-growing fintech sector, IT sector, and the rest of them. Nollywood. Are they creating jobs as fast as we should?
The agriculture sector, that would be a good, that's a labor-intensive sector.
Absolutely.
That would be a good opportunity.
Absolutely. So there are some jobs, too, being created in the agriculture sector, but it's not as fast as it will defray the natural demographic shift that we're seeing in our population.
I think that has also been a sticking point, especially for economists and critics who have said that, look, we have not done a lot with the little we've been given. So the question is, could we have created more jobs in this 4 years, in the time that this administration has had?
I believe so. You've seen credit to the real sector dry up. You've seen credit to SMEs dry up. The only lender to SMEs is just the government. Through the program that the Vice President launched, and they've been giving money around to small-scale businesses. The agriculture sector has been getting some credit, but it's not getting it from the banks, not from the commercial banks, but through the central banks. So we haven't seen a vibrant lending platform that is optimal for the growth of SMEs and for the growth of jobs. And until that happens, then it's hard. Central bank can do some developmental efforts in that process.
A lot of intervention.
you know, they have in the past created intervention funds in real sector, in manufacturing, and in mining. Maybe they should step up and do more. Okay.
Chamberlain, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us today. We appreciate your time on the show. I've been speaking to Chamberlain Peterside, Managing Director and CEO of Xcellon Capital Advisors.